I am indeed, John. Hello, John. Hello, listeners. Hello, viewers.
Yeah, a bit of a late start this morning. I was having connection issues, but we're all up and running now. Editing is it's where the science of podcasting meets the art yet again. So you need to know why you're editing, what you're editing, and for what purpose. There's a blog post in the notes down below that talks about the sound vision. And the sound vision for your show is how you want it to sound, what sort of effects you're after. So you get different variations on this. Things like, what's the word I'm looking at? The Radiolab have a particular style where they start off with people talking over each other, trying to say the same things. And then they get in and they pitch it at a certain intellectual level. But it's their style and that's their sound vision, and you can be fairly sure that each episode's going to be consistent. For beginners, it's a bit tricky to add yet another layer of something to think about, along with the tech and the script and the information and the content and all the rest of it. But this is really part of the pre-launch process to understand the vision, the sound vision that you have for the program, or the podcast if you prefer that. You got any thoughts on that, Rich?
Absolutely what you said, John. Don't try and go overboard on something that doesn't need too much in the way of sound stuff, and you won't need to do much editing, because it's the editing that will take. People that just start out in podcasting, I know this was me. I thought, all right, if I've got a nice little 20-minute episode, it's probably going to take me about 20 minutes to edit. But that's not the case, because you have to go back and check all the time. It could take up to 3-4 hours, depending on the quality. So if you're limited in time, always bear that in mind when you actually make the original file.
I was listening to another show on podcasting a couple of weeks back. Don't worry about editing anything, just top and tail the episode. So that's that blank spot at the beginning after you've hit record and before you start talking, and the blank spot at the end after you've stopped talking and you've hit stop record. And just go with it. I don't know. I have my issues with that. I think there's a need to actually go through and edit properly, whatever that means. But there are things like ums and ohs and whatnot. Like when I rip the audio out of these and then edit, I try and take the ums out, the coughs out, things like that, because you can see the visual clues of those things coming when you're watching a video. But if you're just listening to audio, a sudden clearing of the throat can be quite jarring in the ears. And when we first start, there's lots of mistakes, pauses. Like I was reading from a script when I started. I still do for the World Organic News. And now I can read through pretty much the 10, 15 minutes without an error. But when I first started, I was getting my words mixed and umming and ahhing and not sure what I'd written. I had to go back and cut that. I remember the very first episode, I went through and took out all the pauses, just destroyed it, and sent you a copy and said, "Hey, I've done it. What do you think?" Before I publish. And came back with, it's a little bit stilted and jumpy, and there's no pauses. I just spent an hour ripping the pauses out, you sod. But and of course, the software I was using at the time, I couldn't actually go and go back to the original file, so I had to re-record the whole thing.
Yeah, naturalness is the big thing, isn't it, John? Yeah, it's got to sound natural. I know I go through a lot of occasions where breath noises, people are getting too close to microphones. I like to get rid of that. Now, what I used to do was to highlight it and put Control-L on Audacity, which made it completely silent. And then I realised when I was listening back to it that it was completely unnatural, because there always is a little bit of background noise when someone's talking. And so where there's a breath noise, people are getting too close to the microphone, as I am now, and you can pick up that breath noise. It can be annoying for audio. So what I do is I highlight it and reduce it in amplification until it's still there, but it doesn't jar. So you're listening and it sounds natural. So yeah, I think I remember yours, John. Yeah, it just did not sound natural at all. It sounded like an automation. But to be honest, when I started out, my first podcast, very first one with you, John, we had you were on the other end of the line, and I have this terrible problem. It's still a problem of umming and ahhing. It's just everybody has that, but I seem to be afflicted more than ever. And I started off thinking I was going okay, and then I just heard this laughter down the other end of the line. And it was you, John, and you said you'd counted them. You counted the ums and ahs, and it was about 10 in about 2 sentences. So that was that done. Sorry, John. Yep.
Yeah. The thing with beginning, yes, just do it and get it out there, and no one's listening except friends and family to start with, unless you got 10,000 people on your blog. If you got 10,000 people on your blog, you probably learned how to use your voice anyway with the writing. Yes, there will be ums and ahs, and sometimes I leave them in because they're a connection. There you go. There was an example of it there, of a connection between two parts of a sentence. Now with the breath thing, because I'm reading my scripts and sometimes I have to scroll down on the screen, there will be a pause. And I know that there will be an intake of breath just before I start talking again. So I edit the start of the voice and then move it back along the track in the editor so that it actually flows and you don't get the gap. But there are other times when you have to pause for effect. I mean, there are time to times I'll say, I'll go through a post we're talking about on the blog, in the podcast, and then I'll say something like, just let that sink in. And then I'll pause for that sort of length of time so that people have got time to ruminate and contemplate what's just been said. There are some shows I listen to where I actually have to check to see whether or not it's still playing. The pauses are that long. And of course, by the time I got the phone out of my pocket, it's played again. But it can be annoying. Now, these ones, I know people that do these sorts of things and Facebook Lives and all the rest of it and just rip the audio out and put it up without any editing because it was a live event and they want to capture that feel. And I can see sense in that, but I prefer to do a little bit of light editing. And I always add a little bit at the start of the podcast, letting people know that it was, in fact, the audio from a Google Hangouts Live on air or whatever they call it, so that they know that the sound quality is not going to be the same as usual and that there might be references made to things that people can see, but not always. We generally tend to keep it away from that. Like the earlier when I was pointing down to the bottom of the screen to the notes, that sort of thing doesn't mean much on an audio. But if you point it out at the beginning that it's going to be that it's the sound from a video, then people understand that there might be references. Learning and establishing your sound vision is really critical because then it gives you a framework within which to edit. So, and to give you some idea of that, the bread episode I was talking about a couple of episodes back, or presentations earlier, I've put that up on Pod Thoughts. I'm actually quite enamoured by it. I thought, gee, this bloke's all right. But places where I have overdone the sound effects. And I think that's good for people to see the errors that we make so that they can learn from them as well. If they have a listen to that on, if they go to Pod Thoughts or go to the website, mrjohnmoore.com, I think Pod Thoughts is up there on the left-hand sidebar. You can't miss it. And it's only a 5-minute track, so it's, and that took me about 4 days to do because I was learning everything from GarageBand to the Zoom to place, to voice, to everything. But it was fun to do. And I think you if you see that and then listen to this, like listen to that, then listen to this, you can understand the different sound visions we have. This is just a conversational event, and so we chat back and forth. But with that, I was attempting to use a soundscape under the background. And with the other shows I've done, I tend to have a separate style for each one, slightly different. Tell that they're done by me. even if you didn't know the voice.
I think that was, sorry, John, I was going to say, I think that Brett episode was very good. In a way, you're trying to describe what listeners can't see or smell through sound. So you're telling a story through sound. And I remember you had the sourdough loaf, and you tapped the bottom, the old-fashioned style, to see whether it echoed and whether or not it was made. I think that was very effective, and people could hear the cooking almost. Yeah, sound vision, very important. Yeah, sorry, John.
No, that's all right. So with the other shows you do, Climactic, for instance, you have a different style and a different format. So even if it's not formal, there is a different sound vision for the show from this, and even when we did the Real Food Chain. Is there anything you've sort of defined with that?
With Climactic, yes, it's I do the editing for that and the mixing, and I've got into a stage now where I know what exactly the sound that my co-host wants. It's quite breezy. We have a theme that's written for the show, and that sort of takes it off. The theme is actually, as I say, written, but we've got news readers over the top talking about climate change. It's very effective. I enjoyed it a lot. And it's up to me to use the energy in that theme to go with the scripting, as I do the scripting as well. So the energy stays the same, and then into the interview, and then at the end we come back, and the pace is set. And I think I could say by the theme. We used to have a different theme, and funnily enough, it had a different effect on me with my editing and mixing with the actual show. But definitely, John, different personality. I think that's it. It definitely has a different personality to the Real Food Chain, which was the one we used to do, and we bring back.
Yeah, that's important. The sound, the music that goes with it. They did tests on films where they showed the same scenes but used different music. One lot of music, people were screaming in horror at the end of it, and in another one they were rolling around in uncontrollable fits of laughter because of the different music. So the vision that you hold, even if it's not formal, you'll have a way of wanting your show to sound. And I think if you write it down, it's it makes it easier then to edit to that style. You're talking about the theme music there. The Zen Druid podcast starts with 3 gongs, and so it's more contemplative, meditative style. And I try and pitch my voice and editing that way, so there are longer gaps. Whereas with the World Organic News, I start off with the old Morse code, and so that sort of zips me up a bit. And it starts off with more of a newsread feel about it, like they used to radio back in the 30s, which was the sound vision I was looking for, without all the shortwave hums and whistles and whatnot. There is a blog post, as I said, accompanying this, that came out about 10 minutes before this did. So I got it up there, Rich. It was one of those mornings. Adapt, improvise, come. But we did. So it's pretty straightforward, but it's a difficult thing to define your sound vision. And once you've got your sound vision, then your editing becomes easier.
Yeah, definitely agree.
And the longer you do, particularly if you're doing monologue episodes, it's much easier you read much more easily, much more clearly. You're able to put personality into it. Well, I find I'm able to put more personality into my monologues now than I did when I first started, because I was terrified about all the other stuff. And with the interview ones, again, editing an interview, you've got to be real careful, because you can make people you can have them say the exact opposite of what they were attempting to say, which would be unethical. And the transition between question and answer, sometimes people need a moment to think before they answer a question. How long you let that gap go on, it's long enough for the listener to understand what the question is, and for the interviewee to ruminate upon the question and answer themselves. So it's about pacing the questions, but the answers relative to the whole vision you've got for your show, which it's a finesse thing and it takes time. And you can experiment with this in the pre-launch with different styles of editing, which is what I did first episode. I didn't bother with pre-launch, just rip the guts out of it, send it off, get it checked. No, it's horrible, do it again. Okay. And then just put it out. And then went, oh, what a relief. What am I going to talk about next week? Blah.
Yes, exactly. Yep.
But it turns out there's plenty of info out there for the topics I'm covering. Unless you got anything else to add to this, Rich, it's more about the art rather than the science of the editing.
Yeah, just something I picked up, just what you were when you were talking then, John, about editing in an interview. It's quite interesting in that you do have a lot of power. What I find is when somebody's making a very important point and they're umming and ahhing through it, I don't like that. If there's a lot of gaps in there, whatever, and the point they're making is crucial, I'll cut out those gaps. So they actually sound completely different to what they sounded in the interview. They might have sounded completely not sure about what they were talking about, but the way it's the power of editing, the way you get rid of those gaps, entirely up to you as the editor, and make it sound stronger so that the point is made. I do that quite a lot. I find that quite a lot, and that's just sort of flows on to the other point that I've written down here as you were talking then, John. Individuals edit completely differently, and you can't sort of do half a show and then get somebody else to do half a show because they can't read your mind and you can't read theirs, and it comes out and it has to be what you're happy with. And undoubtedly what you're going to find if you give somebody else half of it to do is that they'll make mistakes, or you consider them mistakes and they'll consider yours differently. So it's an individual thing, and how it comes out is very much what you're happy with. And I know John and I have had a few arguments over this over the years, but we've sort of come together in the middle ground eventually, haven't we?
Artistic vision, that's all.
Artistic vision.
Point, because the last class I ran face-to-face, we were talking about outsourcing editing, and there was one woman there who was absolutely adamant that she wouldn't let anyone touch her stuff. And I'm the same. But there are people that allow other people to do editing for them. If you think about the film industry, the editor can make or destroy a film. And they're completely separate from the writer, the director, the producer. It's a separate skill.
And it's what's left out, John, isn't it, as much as what's left in?
It is. But no two editors, as you say, will do the same job. And they have to have a vision as well for what the film's about. So if you're going to outsource an editor, make sure that the two of you connect on some level so that it makes sense to each other. Otherwise, you're just going to not be happy with the results.
I'm
sure
Sorry, John.
Go for your life.
Just going to say one last point I'm sure you'd like to talk on, John, is because you introduced me to it, was Auphonic, AUPHONIC. It can do a lot of the work for you, as long as you're happy with what it sounds like at the end, and there's only practice. But there's work that it can do. You just go into it. It's a free account up to a certain amount. You put your file through, and it will reduce the noise. It will raise the levels, and it'll come back a superior thing. It's called by a few people I know that have a radio documentary background, Radio National, which here in Australia is the ABC, sort of the benchmark. They don't like it that much because they consider it a bit of a blunt instrument, but it will do a lot of the editing for you. So if you're starting out and you've got a full-time job, say, or something like that, you haven't got time to do all the editing, just do what's necessary, ums and ahs, and make it sound how you like it, the individual style, and then put it through Auphonic. So, John, I know you're an big Auphonic fan.
Okay, so what I consider Auphonic to do isn't editing. Editing I consider to be cutting pieces out, adding pieces in. What I think of Auphonic as is post-production. So once you get the file as you want it, in wave form or any of the other high quality forms. It comes back as an MP3 with the correct bit rate, and we've got an episode just on Auphonic coming up later, where I'll do attempt to do a split screen and do it live so you can see what happens. It does the noise reduction, it sets the volume, all the rest of it. Now, considering people, and therein lies the difference between podcasting and radio. Radio people come from that music background, the documentary background, where they expect the quality to be the same as you're going to get with surround sound in a cinema. And I think while it might be an ego boost, there's no need to go to that level of sophistication. That's probably not the word, but minute detail on each waveform, scrubbing them and tickling them and changing them to the shape you want. It's the content that matters and the level, and make sure that it's that balance between file size and listenability. And what Auphonic does is polish all the stuff off, remove the stuff I don't need, and produces a consistent volume across all my productions. So that's the last thing I do before I publish, is run everything I publish through Auphonic.
Sort of a polisher, isn't it, John?
It is, yeah, and it removes a lot of hum, a lot of noise levels, a lot of unpleasant noise in the background. I didn't get rid of the fella banging on the steel post a few episodes back, but it certainly reduced the volume of it. And because the thing with Auphonic is it's getting better over time too, because it's based on algorithms. And so the more people that use it, the better it gets. And and you get 2 hours for free each month.
Yeah.
4 half-hour episodes, and that's more than enough for a beginner. And if you wanted to buy more time, you can, and it's not overly expensive. They've even got a desktop app you can get. I think it's €98 or €89 and 112 US or something. I forget now. It's a wish list, just so that I don't have to use bandwidth to do it. And I'd recommend everyone run everything through Auphonic at the very end. I've had discussions with other podcasters, and I only do it when the sound's a bit off. Well, okay, but then you're not going to get it's going to sound different from all the others anyway. So I just use the editing, which is what we're talking about today, just to get the cadence right, the volume, not so much the volume, but because Auphonic will look after that. And I tend to edit with it up loud because I'm a bit deaf anyway, so that I can hear everything, even the annoying things in the back. And I found with Auphonic that I don't have to edit out the lip smacks, because and of course, since I discovered that, I don't do anywhere near as many lip smacks anyway. So it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. But, yeah. So, and I'm not actually sure what we're on to next. Let me just have a quick look. I can't remember. It'll be a surprise for both of us and for all our listeners. That'll be
looking forward to it, John.
Who knows what we might come up with? Yeah. So with that, I think we might pull this one to a close. Quite happy that we actually got on air, given all the hoo-ha at this end beforehand.
Okay.
And so we'll say goodbye.
All right. Thank you again, John.
Pleasure.